We are in the greatest revolution in the history of humankind. The times that you and I are living in are greater revolutionary times than those of the agricultural revolution or the industrial revolution, the American Revolution, the French Revolution, any revolution. This is a consciousness revolution. People around the world are waking up to the fact that we have to change. And so, welcome to this revolution. And I know that here it's particularly beautiful because we have this inner revolution. Here, the insights into our inner selves that then we take out to the outer world to bring love and peace. This is where we're moving. This is the new revolution, this consciousness revolution, rising to higher consciousness. So welcome all of you, and you who are in the training sessions. It's fantastic to share this time with you. Are you ready for this revolution? Yeah. Okay. All right. We'll do it. So last night we talked a bit about the different realities. And since some of you are new, I'll just repeat a little of that. What we call the objective reality, this microphone, and the perceived reality, the words I'm speaking through this microphone. Most all human activity is controlled by perceived reality, perception. So there are no countries, there's no religion, there's no culture, there's no economy, there are no corporations except as we perceive them. And when enough of us accept that perception or codify it into laws, it becomes an objective reality, and it impacts objective reality. And so also, last night we talked about how we move from what I call a death economy or a war economy, the one that we've been in for a long time, which is a failure, an economy that's based on killing people, animals, trees, nature, the earth, destroying the resources upon which the economy is based. How do we shapeshift into a life economy or a peace economy, an economy that's based on cleaning up pollution and regenerating destroyed environments, recycling, not digging up any more earth, not destroying anything? How do we move into that? How do we shapeshift into that? Prophecies in every culture that I know of around the world, every indigenous culture, most all cultures except the one I happen to come from, prophesize that we have entered this time of incredible opportunity to rise to higher consciousness. And I mentioned one of those prophecies last night, the eagle and the condor. Tonight, a little later, I'll talk about a couple more. But I also wanted to say that I just wanted to comment as we were sitting here being in peace, sitting in stillness and quiet. Do you really believe you're sitting still? You know what? The earth is rotating at 1,000 miles an hour. You're moving at 1,000 miles an hour right now. Beyond that, the earth moves around the sun at 67,000 miles an hour. The sun, our whole solar system, moves around the galaxy, the Milky Way, at 490,000 miles an hour. You are speeding. It's dizzying up here, you know? And the reason I bring that up is because it's part of the Mayan prophecy, which I'm going to talk about later. All of these prophecies tell us that we've entered a time with tremendous potential to move beyond. It's the time of Shiva. It's the time of the transformer. It's the time of letting the old die and birthing the new. And last night we talked about how many people are discouraged by things that are going on in Italy and Greece and Britain. And a few people are concerned about what's going on in the United States today. And it's what we need. Maybe it'll not be what we want, but it's time to wake up. You know, I'm struck by I have a 34-year-old daughter. She grew up in a time when there was almost no discussion of politics. I was involved in a lot of demonstrations against the war in Vietnam and so on, and got my head beat in by cops. She never went through any of that. But now everybody's talking politics. And it's not just about a single issue like a war in Vietnam or integration. It's broad. We're being shaken awake. How do we move from a war economy, death economy, an economy that we know is not working, into a peace economy that will serve us and future generations of all species. How do we do that? And the answer is we build a new perception bridge. I'll talk more about that later. But we build a perception bridge. So a perception bridge takes us from an objective reality that we don't want anymore into, we cross this perception bridge, we change our perception, our consciousness, and move into an objective reality that we do want to manifest. So we move from this old system. And when I talk about a war economy, I'm talking about a whole system. It's not just the economy, it's the politics, it's everything wrapped up in it. It's a system that's controlled by big corporations. How do we move into something new, into a life economy, a peace economy? By crossing that perception bridge. Shape-shifting. And today at the workshop this afternoon, we did some shape-shifting. We'll do some more in the workshop tomorrow. I hate that word workshop. It's really a dance shop. Shape-shifting shop. We'll get more into that tomorrow. But I want to first of all talk a little, I tell you some personal stories. And these are kind of funny, so you're allowed to laugh. And some of you have heard some of these stories before if you were here last year. But your teachers all assure me that yoga is all about repetition. So you've heard it before. Learn something new tonight. So I want to go back to kind of my first real experience with shape-shifting. I decided I didn't like the war in Vietnam, and I damn well wasn't going to go. And so I ended up joining the Peace Corps. And the Peace Corps sent me to 8 weeks of training in a training camp in Southern California. 8 weeks to learn Spanish, which if you speak another language, you know 8 weeks doesn't give you very much. And I graduated from business school and to learn about credit and savings co-ops. And so then after that, they sent me to Quito, Ecuador. And from there, I'm going to head into the Amazon. And so I leave Quito on this rickety old bus. It's one of these old wooden buses built on a truck chassis up over the Andes. 2 days of riding in this rickety old bus that was filled with chickens and pigs and few people, goats. Everything on that bus for almost those whole 2 days was vomiting, including me. The windows were open. And then we get to the end of the road. We're in the jungle, we're in the Amazon, and now I've got a 2-day walk through thick jungle to where I'm supposed to spend the next 2 years. And as I start walking through the jungle, some people are walking out. And so I decide this is a good opportunity for me to practice my lousy Spanish. To my chagrin, I discover that my Spanish is a lot better than theirs. They don't speak Spanish. They're Shuar, they're indigenous people. They don't speak Spanish. So my first experience with U.S. government work is they teach you a language and then send you someplace where nobody speaks it. How many of you have ever seen a shrunken head or a picture of one? So the Shuar did that. These are the people I'm going to spend the next 2 years with. They're the only head shrinkers in the world. And it's a very sacred act. I'm not going to get into that tonight, but it's not as gory as it sounds. It's actually quite sacred. It's about laying spirit to rest. Anyway, so I'm walking in. I can't communicate with anybody. And I finally get to the place I'm going to spend the next 2 years. And there's one guy there who speaks Spanish. He's the school teacher. He comes from up in the Andes. He won't admit that I can speak Spanish, but he will kind of communicate with me. So I go up to him and I say, "Hey, I'm here to help you guys form your credit and savings co-op." Right. He looks at me like, "Credit and savings?" Like, we don't have any money here. It's barter. It's your bananas for my papayas. What are you doing here? Well, I got to say, I come from over 300 years of Yankee Calvinist, New Hampshire, Vermont. And we're the original Puritans. And one of the things that's just hammered into you, if you're a Calvinist, if you're a Yankee, is when you're sent in to do a job, by God, you do it. So the Peace Corps sent me into this jungle place with a backpack filled with comic books in color, in Spanish, about the benefits of forming credit and savings co-ops. These are printed by the United States Information Service, USIS, better known as useless. But I've got them, you know? And I noticed that every morning, the Shwa people, they all get up very early and they disappear into the forest. They don't come back for a few hours, and the men come back carrying big, heavy, dead animals on their backs, boars and stuff, wild boars, things like that. The women come back with baskets of fruits and vegetables. So I get up every morning, and as they're going into the jungle, I stand there and I hand out these comic books. And they take them, and they don't come back with them. So I figure they've stashed them in there, they're reading them, they've got a library going, you know. And every night I stand up in front of the community, and in my lousy Spanish I give a talk about the benefits of credit savings co-ops, which nobody can understand, of course. But something really interesting happens, that every night more and more people show up. And it reaches a point, people are walking for hours through the jungle to come hear me speak, and they don't have flashlights, they got to go back in the dark. And so, you know, I'm thinking, thanks, Calvin, or whoever you are. Thanks, Mom and Dad. You know, this is working. And then one morning, the school teacher takes me aside and he says, hey, have you noticed we don't have any televisions or radios here? No electricity. We don't have any magazines or newspapers. They couldn't read, they're all illiterate, you know. He says, you're it. Saturday Night Live, every night. The jungle drums that beat the rhythm, and they do use messenger drums. You know, there's a crazy man in our midst. He's taller than any of us. He's blonde. I mean, I was blonder then than I am now even. And he doesn't know how to shoot a blowgun. He can't track a jaguar. He's not going to be around very long. You better come see him while he's here. So about that point, I got it. All my vaunted years of education had nothing to offer these people, but they had a lot to teach me about relationship. I had to understand that I didn't learn anything about relationship. In my schools, college, never learned much about even human relationship, except, you know, psychology, the study of it. But these people not only were very into human relationship, but they were in a relationship with everything. So the earth is a spirit, Nunkwi, a beautiful woman spirit, comes up every night. She works with the roots underground all night long. She works with this all day long. She works with the roots underground. At night, she comes spinning up and works with the leaves and the branches and the tree trunks. The earth, that's Nunkwi. The water is another beautiful woman, spirit guide, Sunki. And the forest is an amazing, handsome man named Shakaim, and everything has spirit. And this was an incredible education for me to feel the spirit of these things. And then, and the real point of this story is I got very sick. I was dying. I couldn't keep any food down. And there was no way, I had lost a lot of weight, and there's no way I can walk for 2 hours through the jungle and then try to find one of these rickety old buses and ride with it up to the nearest medical facility. So I was resigned to dying. And late in the afternoon, the school teacher comes, and he's leading this really tiny, old, crippled-looking man by the hand, little tiny guy, up to me, and he says, "This guy's the shaman." I'm like, well, you know, what's that? You know, I knew nothing about shamans. Witch doctor, you mean? And he says, he could cure you. Got my attention. This old man, he looks at my feet, looks at my head, a lot shorter than me, looks me up and down, and he steps up real close to me and he wags his finger in my face and he says, "You're dying." And that's good. I didn't know it at the time, but the Shwa believe in reincarnation. And he figured my life was just about as bad as it could possibly get. This crazy guy standing up there blithering away about nothing, in a language nobody understands. It's time to move on, It's the time to become a jaguar, shapeshift into an anaconda. I don't care, plant something. Just get on with it, fella. It's good, he says. And I think I started crying at this point. I was doing a lot of crying in those days, but it was a rainforest, so it didn't usually show very much. And sometimes also very much wishing I were in Vietnam, where I figured everybody spoke English, at least the people I'd be hanging out with. But anyway, I start crying at this point, and he says to me, "Oh, damn." Well, this is all translated. "Oh, damn. Maybe you're not ready. In which case, I could cure you tonight." Okay, I'll take that. And he did. So that night, he took me on this shamanic journey. No language. He didn't speak to me. He chanted a lot. Took me on this journey. And on this shamanic journey, kind of like some of the things we did today at the workshop, and we'll do more tomorrow, a little longer than those. I was all night. But on this journey, I saw that I'd grown up with this Calvinistic Yankee family in New Hampshire that are very hygienic. We washed our hands a lot. And we eat very bland foods, meat and potatoes, nothing interesting. And now, well, the Shwa, first of all, they don't drink water. People in the Amazon don't drink water because they know the rivers have organic matter in them. So they drink a kind of beer. It's called chicha, and it's made by women chewing manioc root and spitting it. It ferments, and you add a little water, you add some water, and then you can drink it. And it's pretty safe. Anybody ever drink that out there? Yeah, good, huh? It's an acquired taste. Spit beer. And the other thing is the foods you eat are pretty interesting. So a favorite one is you reach into an old rotting log and pull out a handful of squirming white grubs and high protein. But I was eating a lot of squirming white grubs and drinking a lot of chicha because there wasn't any Perrier. No Cliff Bars. So that's all there was. But on this journey, this shamanic journey, what I saw is that every time I was eating or drinking this stuff, there was a voice saying, "Son, it'll kill you." At the same time, probably my mother, at the same time, I saw how incredibly healthy the Shwa are. The men are built like Tarzan, they carry these dead animals out of the woods. Their legs would make World Cup soccer champions jealous, muscular, strong guys. And the women, well, I was 21 years old. The women were looking really good. And people live to be very old if they're not killed in hunting accidents, canoes tipping over, snakes biting them, something. And so on this shamanic journey, what I understood is that it wasn't the food and drink killing me. It was my perception. It was my consciousness. It was this mindset I had. It was an incredible teaching for me, an amazing lesson in how strong our perception is, our mindsets are. And a few days later, the shaman came back up to me and he looks at me and he says, "You're healed. You owe me." And his requirement was that I become his apprentice. Well, this was 1969. There wasn't any future in shamanism. I'd come out of business school. Today there's a future in shamanism. But I didn't want to have anything. And you had to sacrifice a lot of things to be a shaman's apprentice in this culture. But he saved my life, so I did it. And I spent the next 2 years living with them, and then moved up into the Andes for another year in the Peace Corps with the Quechua people, and trained with their shamans. And since then, I've traveled around the world and trained with shamans in many continents. And what I've learned in all of this is that it's all about perception. And so is modern psychology. It's all about our perception. It's all about our consciousness. And chaos theory and quantum physics tells us it's all about consciousness. It's how we perceive things, and how we perceive things impacts our objective reality. So if you want to go out there and moan and groan and be really scared about what Donald Trump is going to do, it's probably going to get really bad. But if we see this as Shiva stepping in, stirring the pot, stirring things up, if we see this as waking us up, a time of awakening, there'll be a different result. And I think that's what's happening. I really feel that's what's happening. The story goes on, though. After I got out of the Peace Corps, I did what I'd been trained to do. I became an economist with a big consulting firm in Boston. I became chief economist. I was an economic hitman. And I talked last night generically about what economic hitmen do in terms of exploiting the world. But so I'm not going to repeat that, but I'll give you an instance, because I was, in a few years, sent back to Ecuador, this country where I'd fallen in love with these indigenous people. But now I go back as an economic hitman. My job is to get the country to accept huge loans from the World Bank and other organizations that they then would use to hire our corporations to build hydroelectric plants in that country and other places, leave the country holding a huge debt they can't repay, so then we'd go in and demand that they sell their oil real cheap to Texaco in those days and other oil companies without any environmental restrictions or social regulations. That was my job, was to convince them. And at that time, Ecuador had a dictator named General Lara from the army who had been put into power by the CIA and kept there by the CIA, my government. So he would really listen to me and take on these huge debts. Plus, he made a lot of money on the side from them, and so did all of his friends, and they owned the industry, so they benefited from the electricity. So I'm back now in Ecuador. It was really an interesting thing, because I'm doing what I think I'm supposed to be doing. I was taught in business school that the way that you help a poor country is to invest a lot of money in infrastructure. And statistically, you can show it works. The GDP goes up. We can show this over and over. And I would produce these models that would show this. And this is a perception, and it was a perception that the General Lara, and this happened in Indonesia, I was in Iran, I was in many countries doing the same sort of thing, to rob them of their resources, but to give them the perception and to give their leaders a tool to show their people, to give them a perception that things would get better. But in fact, everything got worse for most of the people. Only the wealthiest families benefited, as well as our corporations, because money was diverted from education, healthcare, and other social services to try to pay off the debt, and in the end, they couldn't pay off the debt. With General Lara, took on tremendous amounts of debt to do this, took the country into deep bankruptcy, which the current president has refused to pay some of those loans. He actually went, Rafael Correa, his term's just about up this month, it will be. He's been in office 8 years. He graduated from University of Illinois Business School, MBA. He knows our system, and he refused to pay some of these off. But so I went through 10 years in that job as an economic hitman. And then I had this other moment of enlightenment. I was sailing. I took a vacation after 10 years. All through this period, my conscience was getting the better of me. I was beginning to understand what was wrong. But you know what? And this tells us a lot about our system. Once I understood what was wrong with the system, I was stuck. I came from a pretty poor family in rural New Hampshire, always wanted to travel the world. Well, now I'm traveling the world, flying first class, staying in the best hotels, eating in the finest restaurants, wining and dining with presidents. And I didn't want to think that what I was doing shouldn't continue. But then I also began to understand that I was miserable. I was doing all the things that I had been told would prove that I was successful and happy. But I suddenly realized I was living on Valium and alcohol and a lot of therapy. And so after 10 years, I took a vacation in the Virgin Islands, not too far from here, on a sailboat. And late one afternoon, I rowed the dinghy ashore at St. John Island and climbed up to this old sugarcane plantation, the ruins of a sugarcane plantation. It was beautiful up there. Bougainvillea, the sun setting over the Caribbean, and it just was just idyllic and just beautiful. But as I sat there and looked around, I suddenly realized that this plantation had been built on the bones of thousands of slaves. And then it struck me that the whole hemisphere is built on the bones of millions of slaves from all over the world. And then I had to admit that I was a slaver. I wasn't pulling people out of the jungles of Africa in chains, but I was enslaving people with debt. And so at that moment, I made the commitment I'd never do it again. And I went back to my office and to the president's office the day after I got back from vacation and quit. And then, after a while, I started writing a book about this. Conscience of an Economic Hitman, it was called. And I went out and I interviewed other economic hitmen. What I didn't say tonight, what I did mention last night, is when we economic hitmen fail, when presidents of countries don't accept these loans, people we call the jackals go in, and they either overthrow governments or assassinate their leaders. Two of my clients, President Jaime Roldos of Ecuador, who came in after Lara and tried to get rid of the loans, and Omar Torrijos, head of state of Panama, had a lot of conscience. They had integrity. They would not buy into these deals. They were clients of mine. I knew them personally, and they were both assassinated. So, in any case, I don't know where I was with all that. Just got kind of lost in it. But, what? My book. Thank you. So I interviewed him. Thank you. You know, it's whenever I think about that, what I was doing, what my country's still doing. We're still doing these things. It tears me apart. And anyway, so I started writing a book, and I went out and interviewed other economic hitmen. I started contacting them and jackals. And very soon I got anonymous phone calls threatening my life and that of my infant daughter. I took them seriously. I'd seen what these guys could do. And then the president of a big consulting firm, Stone & Webster Engineering Company, Stone & Webster Consultants actually, took me out to dinner or lunch. And he said, you know, you have a great resume. I was chief economist of one of his rivals. I had 50 people working for me. He said, we'd like to use your resume in our proposals. You won't have to do any work. Just let us use your resumes. Oh, and if you agree to do this, I'll write you a check tomorrow for $500,000, consultant's retainer. This was in the 1980s. $500,000 was worth more than it is today. Still a pretty good amount of money. And then he said, but just don't write that book. I was hit. Same techniques I'd been using with people around the world now coming back on me. I'm being threatened. My life's being threatened. My daughter's life's being threatened. And I'm being offered a bribe, a totally legal bribe. You know, companies like that can hire you as a consultant and give you an outrageous fee, and you don't have to do anything. They use your resume. So what would you have done? I took the money. I had a 2-year-old daughter. And I have to say, in my own defense, I didn't go out and buy a big house or fancy cars or anything. I used the money to start a new career, basically. I went back to the Amazon. And I went back to the people I had been with. And I said, you know, you saved my life, literally, and you changed my life back years ago. And now your forests are under threat. I want to help you. And they said, in their inimitable way, well, that's great. But if you want to do that, don't come here and try to change us. We're not destroying the forest. You are. It's your oil companies. It's your lumber companies. It's your cattle ranches. I can't help that. Last night I talked about how I had this meal with these high executives a few months ago, and they were serving steaks. And I turned to my, a lot of you already heard this, I love this story. To those who didn't, I turned to the organizer and said, is there a vegetarian option? And he said, well, all of this beef is vegetarian. Range-fed beef, it's vegetarian beef. Anyway, perception. So, where was I? Oh, we're destroying the forest. So, thank you. So, go out there. They said, so if you want to help these forests, if you want to save these forests, go back to your people. They're destroying them. It's your demand for cars. It's your demand for big buildings and heavy industry. And most of all, it's your dream. It's your perception. You've had a dream of extreme material success. You've had a dream of a war economy, an economy that's consuming itself into extinction. It's consuming these forests into extinction. It's a dream that's a failure. Go back and change the dream of your people. So I did. I came back to the United States and formed a nonprofit called Dream Change, which still exists. You can go to dreamchange.org. We have a great thing coming up in Cincinnati. It's our second annual Love Summit for entrepreneurs and business executives. I talked about it last night. It's phenomenal that we're bringing love into businesses, and it's sponsored by one of the biggest branding firms in the country, and last year's one was sponsored by one of the biggest advertising agencies in the world, bringing love into business. Anyway, I came back and formed Dream Change. And the indigenous people had also told me, if you have a few people who want to help change the dream of your people, bring them here to learn from us, not to change us, but to learn from us. So I started doing that and writing books. So I couldn't write books on economic hitmen, but I wrote a number of books, Shape-Shifting, The World is As You Dream It, Psychonavigation, those books on shamanism. That was okay with Stoner Webster. And then a little later, when I was been living with the Shuar, the next tribe out, the Achua, were officially uncontacted. And I used to tell my Shuar friends, hey, I want to be the first white man to really hang out with them. And they used to say, no, you don't. They're headhunters too. But they were contacted in '75 officially. And later on, they invited me in and asked me to help change that dream and so on. And out of that came the Pachamama Alliance, which I'm also a co-founder of. How many people here know the Pachamama Alliance? Great organization. You'll get to know it. That's another one, pachamama.org. So in any case, I go back to these people and I start working on how do we change the dream in our country, and how do we change the dream in the world? How do we change this death economy, this war economy? How do we transform that into a life economy, a peace economy? What's the route to making that happen? And it was obvious. It's the shamanic route. It's the route of changing perception. It's all about building that perception bridge. So I talked about the perception bridge. So if you look at my individual situation, one objective reality is I am drinking chicha and eating squirming white grubs. The perception was it'll make me sick, which took me to this objective reality. I get sick. Once I changed that perception, I continued to eat these grubs and drink this chicha for 2 years, but I changed the perception, and the new objective reality is I was very healthy. For 2 years, I never get sick. I go back all the time now. I go every year, this year, twice a year. In 2 months, I'm taking 14 medical doctors from Baylor University Medical Center into these people to learn about shamanism. Isn't that wild? And so it's that perceived reality, it's the perception here that changes the objective reality. And that was an amazing education for me. The same thing that we were using as economic hitmen. And then at 9/11, so I'm going to skip forward a little bit. 9/11, I'm in the Amazon with the Shuar, with a group of people who are in there learning from them. When I come home, I go to ground zero. I have this drawn instinct that I have to go there. And as I'm standing there looking down at this pit that's still smoldering, I know at this point I've got to come clean. My contract with Stone & Webster's over, and so I decide that I'll write the book. But this time I'm not going to contact anybody else. I'm going to do it in secret. So instead of conscience of an economic hitman, it becomes confession. It's a personal story that it doesn't need anybody else out there. And I decide I'll write the book, the whole manuscript, not a proposal, get the whole manuscript written and get it out to publishers, and at that point it'll be my insurance policy. I did. The book was rejected by 39 publishers. And then one brave publisher was on the verge of bankruptcy, published it, and it went on the New York Times bestseller list and stayed there for a year and a half. It sold millions of copies. It's in 33 languages. It's become a huge success and taken all the other books out there too. And I thought at the time that this book then becomes my insurance policy, because any serious jackal is not going to want to kill me because they know that that'll sell more books. I become a martyr, sell more books. What I didn't take into account was the kind of crazies out there. And so about 4 or 5 months after the book was written, I've been invited to speak at the United Nations about this book. I fly up to New York on a Monday, and I was in really good shape. I've been a martial artist most of my life. Over the weekend, I'd been sparring. I was in really good shape. And this journalist had been bugging my agent, my publicist, to pick me up in the airport and take me to lunch, wanted to interview me. Freelance journalist, we couldn't find many good credentials, but it seemed to beat taking a cab. So I went to lunch with him, and then he took me to the place I was staying that night, which was a friend's house. And my friend and my literary agent were out walking in Central Park. We were going to go out to dinner afterwards, and suddenly I got hit by massive internal bleeding. I lost, I don't know, more than half the blood in my body. By the time they came into the apartment where we were staying, I'm in shock. I'm down on the floor. I've got a blanket over me. I'm shaking. It just so happened that the woman I was staying with was Tom Brokaw's NBC News, one of the producers. She had very good contacts, one of whom was Pavarotti's gastroenterologist. You got to be good to be Pavarotti's gastroenterologist. You got to be the best in the world, you know? Like, imagine. Oh, yeah, look at that stomach. And so she and I can't even sing, you know? You wouldn't want to hear me sing. So she calls him, this doctor, 7 o'clock at night. He gets on the phone and he says, "Oh, so you wrote that book. I want to get your autograph." And I'm like, "But doctor." And then he said, "Oh my God." He says, "You know, you'll be dead within an hour. We get a cab. Don't take an ambulance. They take too long. Get to Lenox Hill Hospital in New York City. I'll call ahead and we'll see what we can do." So that all happened. And to make a long, gory story short, they ended up taking out 70% of my large intestine. Now, the interesting thing about this story is that this was a very enlightened doctor. And 2 weeks later, as I'm getting ready to fly back home, I lived in Florida at the time, I go to his office for a final consultation. And he looks at me and he says, "You know, what I should be telling you right now is that you've just become a carnivore. I turned you into a carnivore. An herbivore has a very long colon. A carnivore has a very short one. Human beings are someplace in between. I just took you to the carnivore stage. I should be telling you that you shouldn't eat any more fruits or vegetables or roughage, stuff like that. Go back to the New Hampshire diet." But he said, "I was reading your book, Shapeshifting, while you were here." And he said, "You know, you had 7 feet of colon when you came here. I took 5. You had 25 feet of small intestine, of which the last 5 doesn't really do much except connect to the large intestine. I think if you do what you write about in this book, you can shapeshift that last 5 feet of small intestine into large intestine and live a normal life." And I did. I ate everything. You don't get too much carnivore stuff here. you know, uh, so shape shifting. It's all about perception. It's all about knowing we can do it. It's all about having the confidence that we can do it. And so now, what's happened, and I talked about this a lot more yesterday, is we've moved into this period of predatory capitalism. Milton Friedman won the Nobel Prize in 1976 by saying the only responsibility of business is to maximize profits regardless of the social and environmental costs. That's not what I'd been taught a few years earlier in business school. I'd been taught that a good CEO makes a decent rate of return for investors, but also is a good citizen, takes good care of his employees and the communities where he worked. Friedman said, no, you have to maximize profits for your stockholders. And that changed everything. Overnight, the signing of his name on that Nobel Prize, I mean, he'd written a lot before then. He was well known. He was consulting with presidents. He was advising presidents of corporations and countries. He was a well-known guy. But at that moment, suddenly everything changed. The whole perception of what it is to be successful in business went from serving a public interest, and it had been, I told the history of this last night, but it had been going downhill for a long time. But still, when I was in business school, we had that idea, you have to serve the public, make a decent rate of return, and serve the public. Suddenly it was only about maximizing rate of return for your investors. Changed everything. We have what I call predatory capitalism today. And it's created this totally failed system. There's no question. The oceans are rising, the glaciers are melting, species are going extinct. You know, we're on the verge of extinction. We're consuming ourselves into extinction. And so we must cross that perception bridge and create a peace economy, a life economy. Imagine if we paid Raytheon and General Dynamics, either get rid of them better, but let's assume we can't do that. So we pay them to, instead of making missiles and war equipment, we pay them to find ways and make equipment that'll mine all the plastics in the ocean out here. They will mine all the oil that's spilled around every oil drilling rig in the world and every gas station in the world. And imagine if we paid other companies to really come up. Imagine if we convinced Monsanto to actually produce seeds that would not require chemicals, but that would produce food more efficiently for starving people. There's so many possibilities out here. It's an exciting time to move into. And I think we're being really, really pushed. I think Trump has come along. I think Brexit's come along. I think all of what's going on in Russia, what's going on in Turkey, all over the world, is people are being forced to look at a failed system. We're being forced to look at a shadow side. We're being forced to come out of lethargy because we've been lethargic. The United States, you know, the country that I would like to feel proud of, has done a terrible job. Since at the end of World War II, we had the opportunity to move forward and really help form democracies in a better world. Instead, we went after the Russians. We got into bed with the big corporations. The corporations today have the power. They control governments around the world. But the good news is you control the corporations. You have the power. We, the people, have the power. Corporations will not survive unless you buy from them and work for them, manage them, invest in them, or have your pension funds or whatever invest in them. Corporations are totally dependent on us. The marketplace is a democracy if we choose to use it as such. Every time you buy something or decide not to, you're casting a vote. But it's important that you not just do that, it's important that you also send an email to all your friends and neighbors and to the executives at their corporation saying, I didn't buy from this company because it's not paying its workers in Indonesia a fair salary. And I mentioned this last night, I know so many executives that would like this to happen. I'm going to talk more about this in the workshop tomorrow. But there's so many executives out there that I found that are frustrated with the system. They want to change, but they're afraid that if they make a change, they'll lose a little bit of market share, and if they lose a little bit of market share, their major stockholders will fire them. They want to hear from you. They want consumer participation. They want to see consumer groups. We're in a time for shape-shifting. We're in a time to move into an incredibly exciting time. We're in a time to where we can really elevate consciousness. So I'm running out of time. So I want to share with you the Mayan prophecy, because I promised to do this. And I think it's an important one at this point, because it was portrayed by Hollywood and many others as this doomsday prophecy. I've been working with and living with Mayan shamans since the 70s, and I just came here from Guatemala, where I take a group of people every year. I take groups of people to work with shamans in Colombia, in Ecuador, the Amazon, and in Guatemala, and I'd love to have some of you join me. Go to johnperkins.org, or organic, johnperkins.org. And incidentally, I was supposed to mention that the bookstores sold out of my books, but you can get them online. Sorry, I can't sign them if they're online, but I'll be happy to sign your forehead. Or any other part of your body you'd like to have signed. Where was I? Mayan prophecy, thank you. So the Mayans, maybe more than 2,000 years ago, the Mayan Popol Vuh, their sacred text, when you mention the Popol Vuh, you get music. The sacred text of the Mayans, the equivalent of our Bible, basically. And it has many stories, but one of the stories that comes out of that text is about a time when there was a king named Seven Macaw. He was characterized by brutality, materialism, greed. And the twin heroes, boy and a girl, came along and cut off his head and threw it in a basket, replaced him with Hunahpu, who's characterized by love, compassion, cooperation, spirituality. And the Mayans have always said that is about the times, this is all about the changing times. We're moving from the era of Seven Macaw to the era of Hunahpu. But the twin heroes have to do it. The leaders are not going to cut off their own heads. You have to do it. We have to do it. We are the heroes. We're the twin heroes. And the reason 2012 was so important, and December 21st of 2012, it's because it goes back to the fact that we're traveling at 490,000 miles an hour, our solar system, around the Milky Way. It takes 26,000 years for us to make that circuit. The Mayans knew this. Their astronomers knew this. Their calendar, the long count calendar, is 26,000 years. The short count calendars are about 5,200 years. And 17 calendars came to an end in 2012, or in December of 2012. And this was the end of the old era, the era of Seven Macaw. It's the beginning of the new era of Hunahpu. And the reason December 21st is important is because on that date, the Mayan astronomers, 2,000 years ago, predicted that on that date, the solar system would have completed a whole circuit of 26,000 years back to the beginning. And if you looked from the Earth at the sun at that point, the sun would be seen as being in the center of the Milky Way, what's called the Great Rift, the dark spot. And that represents the head of the old era being thrown into the basket. The sun is the head being thrown into the basket. And they're quick to say that that particular date, December 21st, is just a marker like, January 1st, 2000, when everything was supposed to change. The computers were all going to crash. They didn't, but everything has changed since 2000. And so the Mayans did amazing ceremony on that date. I had a group in Guatemala. We do incredible fire ceremonies. We always do incredible fire. We do incredible things with these people. You got to come. You should get this whole group there. That'd be fun. So there were ceremonies on that day. It's a marker day, but it's really to say it's the end of an old era and the beginning of a new. So we are in this transition, and I told the story of the eagle and the condor last night, which tells the same idea that we're moving into this new era of the coming together of the mind and the heart, the male and the female, the feminine and the masculine, of the indigenous and the industrialized peoples, whatever we want to call ourselves. This is an amazing era. You were born at this time because you have a role to play in this era. And that's why you're here. Because you have this role to play. And this is a place to get some of that training. Training is important. And so you're here because you know you have a mission, a role to play in moving into this new era. This is the time of the new era. This is the time of Shiva. This is the time that things are going into turmoil and they're going to come out. Chaos theory says that out of chaos comes order. How are we going to direct that order? Are you ready for that? Are you really ready? Okay. So I want to end this with another little story that ends in a quote from the Dalai Lama. But the story behind it is kind of interesting. So I took a group of about 33 people to Ladakh, which is in northern India. It used to be part of Tibet. It's an Indian protectorate, unlike what we call Tibet today, which is in China. The Dalai Lama can still go into Ladakh. And I took this group in there a few years ago, and the woman who organized on the ground was an Indian woman who had been to workshops with me and asked to do this. And she had tried for about a year to get a private hearing, private time with the Dalai Lama for our whole group without any success. But we get to Ladakh, and the Dalai Lama's there, and he's going to give a talk. It's Wisig, which is one of their most sacred holidays. And he gives this talk to about 10,000 people in this huge field, and they give us a seat of honor next to the dais, and we got a special interpreter, and we're there, but we don't get a private session with him. And she was very disappointed. But I'm like, well, we're here. What the heck, you know? But then the last day, as we're in the Leh Ladakh airport flying to Jammu, India, we're waiting for the plane early in the morning, and the Dalai Lama comes waltzing in. He wasn't actually waltzing, but with his entourage. And he's carrying my book, Shapeshifting, under his arm. And the woman had sent him the book, so it's not quite as accidental as it sounds, but he's got this book under his arm. And anyway, to make a long story short, I get invited to sit with him at the front seat of the airplane, 727. So I'm sitting up there in the front seat of the airplane with the Dalai Lama, and we're having a great conversation. He's got an amazing sense of humor. And one of the things I wanted to ask him, I said, you know, Your Holiness, there's a prophecy, the Himalayan prophecy, another prophecy, is that the 14th Dalai Lama is the last. And he says, yeah, I know, I'm it. He is. And I said, so Your Holiness, what do you think about that? And he said, well, I really don't know, but I think I may be the last Dalai Lama from the Himalayas. Maybe I'm the last Buddhist Dalai Lama. Like, what does that mean? And I said, I didn't say that, but I did say, well, where do you think the next Dalai Lama might be from? And he says, well, that's why I'm reading your book. Because he says, I think the next Dalai Lama, I think she or he might be a shaman from the Amazon or the Andes. Well, that blew my mind, because I don't know any shamans in the Amazon or Andes who know anything about dakinis or wrathful deities or all these other deities in the Buddhist deity scheme. But I didn't get into that too much at that point. The plane lands, and as a result, the Dalai Lama, after this conversation we've had, he calls over his secretary and says, I want these people to come, I want this guy's whole group to come and visit me in my house in Dharamsala in 2 days. Hang out in my living room. I'll join them. We'll have a conversation. And the secretary says, well, you're scheduled. And the Dalai Lama you're scheduled for a resting period. The Dalai Lama says, I don't need to rest. But we had already purchased tickets for a museum in New Delhi on that day. What would you what would you have done? So 2 days later, we're sitting in the Dalai Lama's living room. And it's amazing. You know, he walks into the room and he greets us, and then he says, I want to make one thing perfectly clear. Don't become a Buddhist. The world doesn't need any more Buddhists, but do practice the Buddhist principles of compassion and love, and cooperation. And then I got it. You know, the Dalai Lama is saying, maybe the next Dalai Lama won't know about any of this stuff that goes along with it, but will know about compassion. Will know about the deep principles behind it. It's a very interesting experience there. And so I'm going to leave you with a quote from the Dalai Lama that also came up at that point. But I also just really want to leave you with the thought that you have tremendous power. Every one of us has great individual power, and we have the power to change the world. So here's just want to, I'm going to run over about 2 minutes here, but sorry. Several things you can do. Okay, we'll talk more about this in the workshop. Whatever you can do needs to come from your heart. All right, we got to change this. We're going to transform. And each of you has an individual role to play. I'm a writer, I write. And I speak of things like this. I don't know what you do, so I don't know where your heart lies, but you can't burn out. You got to have fun doing this. It's got to be ecstatic. It's got to be fun to do this. Yes, there'll be routine, there'll be drudgery, but it's got to be fun beneath it. And you know, I just mentioned a few things that you could do. Just throw them out quickly. One of them is to keep waking up. Wake up more and more and more, and wake everybody you know up. Wake them all up. And second thing, keep telling the new story. Yes, bring up the old story. It's not working. The new story is, it's going to work though. We're going to move into a peace economy. Spread that word out to everybody. Get it out there. And another thing we can all do is live very consciously, and I think most of you do, but get all your neighbors and friends to live very consciously. And when you shop, write those companies that you've found that you can trust. Let them know you can trust them, and let the other ones know you got to let them go. Send them emails. You know, so a fourth thing we can do is really, really flood the media, flood corporations, flood government officials with the message that we must change. We are demanding change. We are demanding a peace economy. We're demanding an economic system and a political system that is environmentally sustainable, spiritually fulfilling, and socially just. We are demanding that. Get that message out. Send emails. Nike, I love your products, but I'm not going to buy them anymore until you pay your workers a fair salary in Indonesia. And then send that to all your circles and ask them to send it to all their circles and ask them to send it to all their circles, and flood Nike with those emails, and Monsanto and Exxon and any corporation you can pick. Make that happen. Do that. And also pick icons, heroes that are moving toward a life economy. No more of these millionaires and billionaires up there on the front pages. It's these people, your teachers. It's it's the people here. It's the people that are moving toward deeper spirituality, toward creating this peace economy. And my hat's off to all of you who have made this incredible ashram successful and working. And these are our heroes. There's a lot of heroes out there, but they're not the ones that we're putting on the cover of our magazines for the most part. So make those people the icons and the heroes. We can do this together. So the quote I want to leave you with. As we sat in that living room for about 3 or 4 hours with the Dalai Lama, he opened it to questions. We got some very weird questions. So it might be some of the people in that group, maybe tomorrow. But one of the people said, you know, there's a writer, it wasn't me, but there's a writer in the United States that's advocating that we all take 5 minutes off on a certain date at a certain time and pray for peace. What do you think of that idea, Your Holiness? And Dalai Lama says, you know, praying for peace, meditating for peace is good. But if that's all you do, it's a waste of time. And maybe it's worse than that. Because if you walk away from praying and meditating for peace and do nothing, maybe it's just a substitute. You must also take action. And I think the Dalai Lama so epitomizes that, as do your teachers here. Meditating a lot, praying, meditating, chanting, and also taking action in the world to make it a better place. And so as you go out into the world, please do both, do the prayers, do the meditation, and define for yourself your mission. Why did you come at this time in history into this life? Why are you here at this ashram? Why are you on this journey? And I think you'll come to the answer that you're here because you're meant to participate in this new era that's been prophesized by so many cultures, where it's time to move from Sevamaka to Hunapu, and it's time to move from a war economy, a death economy, to a peace economy, a life economy. Are you ready to do that? Are you really ready? Okay, I can't wait to join you in it, and thank you. It's so wonderful to be here with you. Thank you so very, very much.